Greetings, everyone. My name is Nana Fairman, and I'm a doctorate student at CTS.
Today, we're going to discuss religious diversity. Religion shapes our identity, ethical commitments, and relationships, but it also intersects with structures of privilege, bias, and global challenges, like the ecological crisis. In this session, we will explore how prejudice operates within and between religious communities, and how interreligious engagement can foster solidarity and understanding, and how diverse religious traditions offer unique resources and perspective to address urgent global issues. Now let's begin by exploring what it means to navigate difference itself. Religious diversity is often framed as a challenge that divides us. Rachel Mikva reminds us that religious difference is not a problem to solve, but a reality to navigate. We will look at real world examples of prejudice, privilege, and collaboration across belief and non belief, asking how we might turn tension into shared pursuit of justice. Next, we'll consider how naming and framing religious identities can shape our interactions.
When naming and navigating religious difference, labels can clarify identities, but can also harden stereotypes. Effective engagement requires humility, curiosity, and awareness of power imbalances. The goal is not to erase difference, but to meet across it with respect. From here, we can draw inspiration from other social movements in history that have navigated diversity.
Women's movements offer strategies for coalition building, resisting tokenism, and centering marginalized voices. These lessons show that solidarity across difference requires more than dialogue. Rather, it needs shared strategy. Even with strong strategies, significant barriers to cooperation remain. Barriers include polarization, unequal power between traditions, and superficial dialogue that avoids structural injustice. Overcoming this requires patience, persistence, and shared commitments. One such barrier stems from unexamined advantages, what we call privilege. Christian privilege means unearned advantages in societies where Christianity is dominant, like holidays off, positive media representation, and cultural assumptions. Recognizing this is not about blame, but about understanding systemic norms. In some contexts, this privilege aligns with political projects that merge religion and nationalism. Christian nationalism merges religious and national identity, promoting policies that privilege Christianity. It appears in the United States and globally with deep implications for pluralisms and minority rights. Other communities face the opposite challenge, struggling to protect their sacred traditions. For many Native American traditions, the earth itself is viewed as sacred space. Rivers, mountains, and plains are not symbolic, but living presences. For example, Bear Butte in South Dakota is a sacred mountain, a site of vision quests and prayers for several Plains tribes, including the Lakota and Cheyenne. It is understood as a place where the Creator communicates with the people. Also, Standing Rock, sacred to the Sioux Nation, became a global symbol of indigenous sovereignty during the 2016-2017 protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline, where protecting water was both a spiritual and political act. And yet, United States law often fails to protect such places, as in Ling versus Northwest Indian Cemetery in 1988, where the Supreme Court allowed development on sacred land, refilling the gap between legal definitions of religious freedom and indigenous understandings of sacred responsibility. And furthermore, bias can also affect those without religious affiliation and shaping public perceptions. Atheists remain among the least trusted groups in the United States surveys, often stereotyped as immoral or unpatriotic. Yet, interfaith collaborations show shared moral commitments beyond belief systems. Meanwhile, prejudice toward minority faiths often takes targeted and gendered forms, as seen in antisemitism and Islamophobia. Both persist globally, fueled by myths, conspiracy theories, and political scapegoating. Muslim women often face gendered Islamophobia tied to the hijab, which often conveys the emotional toll of constant suspicion. And undeniably, we must speak clearly to stop anti Semitism and say no to Islamophobia, because prejudice against any community undermines justice for all. Interreligious dialogue can help dismantle stereotypes by fostering genuine relationships across faith lines. Educational approaches from school curricula to community workshops can challenge misinformation and cultivate empathy. But beyond dialogue and education, there's a collective responsibility to speak out when we witness hate, to stand alongside targeted communities, and to ensure that our institutions reflect values of equity and mutual respect. One way to resist Islamophobia and antisemitism and to counter all forms of prejudice is through storytelling, by sharing lived experiences. Personal stories cut through abstract debates, whether it's Sarah exhaustion in hijab monologues or Khalid's journey to reconciliation despite having lost her son in the conflict, that humanize the other and replace stereotypes with empathy. Personal narratives can open space for connection in ways that facts alone cannot. Eventually, these personal narratives can open the door to courageous acts of engagement across deep divides. In violent conflict zones, Parent Circle brings Palestinians and Israelis who lost their family members into dialogue, choosing empathy over revenge. Such engagements can grow into broader alliances even under political strain. These alliances have been powerful in civil rights advocacy, though geopolitical tensions can strain them. Yet solidarity persists, like 550 American rabbis condemning politicized anti-Semitism. In living toward our commitments, we need to regularly check in on our wellness with each other, grounded in each faith and tradition. Even more so, some thinkers invite us to reimagine religion itself for justice and sustainability. Jane Bailey's metaphor of composting religion means letting harmful elements decay to nourish justice and sustainability, transforming tradition without abandoning it. From such transformation, a last garden of renewal, faith, and practice can emerge, rooted in the old but blossoming with new life. A transformed vision of religion also influences how we approach the ecological crisis. Religious traditions shape ecological ethics, and Negate frames Muslim environmentalism as fardu kifaya, or a collective duty that calls entire communities to act for planetary care. She emphasizes that this ethics is deeply tied to justice, linking environmental harm to broader systems of inequality. Christian theologian John Cobb and Muslim philosopher Said Hussein Nasser both root ecological care in sacred cosmology. If Gate, Cobb, and Nasser give us broad theological visions, other thinkers explore how these visions translate into practice. Fazlun Khalid and Owen Jackson, for example, approach Islamic ecological ethics from two distinct angles, one through spiritual renewal, the other through legal reform, offering complementary paths toward environmental justice.
Islamic ecological ethics draw on both spiritual cosmology and legal principle to guide environmental stewardship. Fazlun Khalid argues that the root cause of ecological degradation is modernity's desacralization of nature, a worldview that sees the natural world merely as a resource to exploit. He then calls for a return to Quranic teachings that affirm nature as an ayah, a divine sign, and humanity as Khalifa or vicegerents accountable to God for the care of creation. This is a moral spiritual call to realign human society with Mizan or the balance embedded in creation. Owen Jackson, on the other hand, works with the framework of Islamic law or Sharia, specifically the higher objectives, known as Al Maqasid al Sharia, to argue for climate justice. He sees environmental protection not just as an ethical ideal, but as a legal obligation tied to the preservation of life, lineage, and property, all of which are threatened by ecological collapse. While Khalid critiques the philosophical roots of environmental harm and calls for civilizational shift, Jackson focuses on how existing Islamic legal tools can be applied in contemporary governance and policy.
In short, Khalid offers a moral critique of modernity and spiritual visions for resacralizing our relationship with nature, while Jackson provides a practical legal pathway for embedding environmental care into Islamic jurisprudence and policymaking.
Islamic thought offers one set of tools, from moral spiritual renewal to legal reasoning, for addressing the ecological crisis. But Christianity has also developed theological visions for environmental care, shaped by its own spiritual traditions.
Christian perspectives offer another theological framework for caring for the earth. John Cobb's process theology emphasizes life's interdependence, urging moral transformation in political and economic systems. While distinct in their sources and language, both Islamic and Christian traditions grapple with similar questions. What is humanity's role in creation? And how should that role shape our systems and values? Comparing key thinkers from each tradition, John Cobb and Syed Hussein Nasser, help us see both their unique insights and their shared commitments. John Cobb, representing a Christian process theology perspective, grounds his ecological ethic in the interdependence of all life, an idea drawn from Alfred North Whitehead's philosophy. For Cobb, creation is a dynamic, evolving web of relationships. Humans must choose to align political and economic systems with the flourishing of all beings. His emphasis is on transformation as an ongoing process requiring continual moral and institutional change. While Said Hussein Nasser, from an Islamic philosophical tradition, roots his ecological vision in sacred cosmology, he identifies the spiritual crisis at the heart of environmental degradation as a loss of metaphysical awareness. For Nasser, the solution is to revive traditional religious sciences and metaphysical truths, awakening humanity to see nature as a theophany, a manifestation of the divine. Both Cobb and Nasser reject modern materialisms and see the ecological crisis as fundamentally spiritual. However, Cobb's approach leans towards social and institutional reform guided by relational ethics, while Nasser's emphasizes a return to perennial wisdom and spiritual reorientation. Together, they illustrate how different theological frameworks, one process oriented and reformist, and the other rooted in traditional metaphysics, can converge on a shared imperative for ecological care. These converging visions are not just theoretical, they inspire real world movements where faith becomes a driver of environmental justice. Essentially, these ideas come alive in faith based movements for environmental justice. Movements like Green Muslims, Laudato Si, and Indigenous Land Defender show how faith mobilizes ecological action. A famous Sufi master, Jalaluddin Rumi's words remind us that every tradition and every part of creation has its own way of engaging in the sacred mystery. The list moves from human communities to elements of the natural world, showing that spiritual diversity is inseparable from ecological diversity. Just as ecosystems thrive through variety, so too does our human search for meaning. Our task is not to judge these paths, but to honor their uniqueness and learn what they revealed about the shared human longing for connection to one another and to the earth. And all of these threads lead us to the following key takeaways. Prejudice exists across identities. Privilege must be recognized to be addressed. Interreligious engagement fosters empathy, justice, and ecological action. With that spirit of honoring both human and ecological diversity, we come to our final reflection on working together across difference.
The challenges we face, from prejudice to climate change, demand that we work together across difference. We may not share the same beliefs, but we can share the same hope for a world that honors human dignity and the planet we call home. This is the manifestation of living into commitments and affecting social change, turning shared values into concrete action for the common good.